All right, hello guys. And the big question going around in the NFL right now is why did the Panthers bench Bryce Young? He was their number one pick only, a year ago. Already they've benched him. And so I want to talk about, is it too early to call him a bust? I want to break down the first two games the Panthers have played this season and show you guys why I think they needed to bench him and that I think that it might already be over. And I do want to say one thing and preference one thing as we're going to this video. I think where a quarterback lands is far more important than the actual quarterback, because I think all of the quarterbacks are usually talented that you're seeing going in the first round, but the situation in which they go to really makes a difference, right? And so I want to give Bryce Young the benefit of the doubt. He went into an awful situation. Last year, the offensive line was horrible. They didn't have good running back play. They had no weapons. Like, their leading guy was Adam Thielen. That should tell you enough. I mean, he was great in Minnesota, but he's kind of an older guy, more of a slot type of receiver. And so the Panthers, they reevaluated things, right? Their defense was actually pretty decent last year, but it really changes going into this season. Brian Burns goes to the Giants. Derek Brown is out for this season. So all of the great players that the Panthers kind of were known for, they left. And so the defense got worse. So what did they do in the offseason to try to address it and kind of rebalance things? They bring in Deontay Johnson from the Steelers. Pretty good weapon to hopefully use for Bryce Young. You go out, you draft Jonathan Brooks. Unfortunately, he got injured, and so he hasn't actually been playing so far in the NFL. Be excited to see how he does when he comes in. They tried to upgrade the offense just in general, and I think they did a decent job of it. It's still not great. Still think you need more weapons and things like that, but it was enough to where if Bryce Young is really your guy, he should start to show some signs of life, right? And that's kind of the thing I look for young quarterbacks specifically. There are some that just blossom right away. CJ Stroud is one of those very rare cases where a rookie quarterback came in and then just dominated, right? He was great in his rookie season. A lot of quarterbacks aren't like that, right? They take a little bit of time to get going and finding their place. I mean, think about Jordan Love sat on the bench for a number of years before he even started, and now he's been really good, right? And so he was put in a good situation. With Bryce Young, I can't imagine how much confidence you would lose having no weapons, no time to pass. Your offense, you can't rely on your offensive line. You play a whole season, and then that system changes going into the next year, right? So now Bryce Young has to now learn a different offense. And again, this is only his second year with all these new players. And so Bryce Young, starting out this season, expectations for me were very low. I wanted to see that Bryce Young either improved in one of the key areas, whether it's decision-making, whether it's accuracy, whether it's pocket presence. You needed to see something that showed some sort of improvement from Bryce Young, because the great quarterbacks, the guys that are going to be your franchise quarterbacks, are going to make the rest of your players better, right? And that's just not the case with Bryce Young. He just hasn't done much. He hasn't shined at all. There's not been much to really praise from Bryce Young. Now, I do want to take a look at some of the statistics and kind of show us what the picture of for the Panthers has been. So the first thing to note, their defense is horrible this year. It is by far probably the worst defense in the league. As of 2 weeks in, they get blown out by the Chargers. The Chargers could do pretty much anything they wanted against the Panthers. The Saints ran over them as well. Again, it's hard to judge how good these teams really are. Now, the Saints have started out really hot. Maybe they'll continue that on. Maybe it's just they started hot and that's about it. The Chargers are an interesting team. They've definitely improved from last year, but you look at this and you go, Bryce Young is playing the Chargers and the Saints. Not the greatest defenses in the world. Now, maybe the Charger defense is much better with Jim Harbaugh at the helmet, but you would still suspect like Bryce Young to be able to do something against those defenses. And so you have a number of things occur. One thing is the defense is really bad. But the second thing is, in the first game anyway with the Saints, they couldn't run the ball at all. It's not to say that they didn't try to run the ball. It's that they ran the ball and were averaging less than like 3 yards in their first game against the Saints. So they had no running game, right? Run blocking, not good in game one. And so as we look at this, first game from Bryce Young, he just wasn't particularly good. His completion rating was not great at all. He was 13 of 30 below 50% in terms of the completion rating. He had 2 interceptions. He got sacked 4 different times. I will say the Saints did get a lot of pressure on the Panthers quarterback Bryce Young, The only bright spot of the game that I can really say for the Panthers in their first game against the Saints, like Xavier Legette, their receiver that they drafted this year, he looked decent. He had 4 receptions for 35 yards, but the fact that Adam Thielen is still the guy with the leading amount of yards is quite scary. That should not be the case, but it's going to be kind of a common theme. But if you go then to the Chargers game, so that happened on Sunday, this is a mess. I mean, Bryce Young threw for 84 yards, 1 interception, wasn't particularly hit that much. He just couldn't get anything going. And that's also the weirdest part about this as well is they actually had a pretty solid running game. They only ran it 18 times. They were down most of the game, so can't exactly run all the time, but they were averaging 5 yards a carry. Could be a bit inflated because Chuba Hubbard did have 23-yard run at some point of this game. So if you take out that run, it's probably a much worse average. But still, I think the point of this is you come to this head where, one, Bryce Young is not showing any signs of life. He looks like a quarterback that's almost regressed from last season. And part of that is probably learning a new system. But how is it that the Panthers get more talent? They invest more in that offense to, try and lift Bryce Young up. And it seems like everything got worse from last season. Like, if you're a Panthers fan, I don't think you could have expected the season to go even worse than the last season did. And so is this preemptive, right? Should they have given Bryce Young more time? I think probably they should have maybe given him a couple more games just to feel out this offense. But I wasn't in the Panthers training camp. I wasn't there, during their practices. They could be seeing that this just isn't going to get better. He isn't the guy. And so you pull the trigger. And I think right now, once you pull Bryce Young, that's really you saying you don't trust this quarterback anymore, and he's not your guy. That shatters Bryce Young's confidence, I would assume. And so you come to this point where Bryce Young kind of becomes like a Sam Darnold-esque quarterback. So maybe he can do better in a different system or, a different offense with more talent maybe around him. He could thrive like someone like Sam Darnold. And as of right now, I think you have to say Bryce Young is a bust. Taken number 1 overall, he just doesn't show any signs of life. And Caleb Williams, right? I think this is a good example. Caleb Williams, I'm not as worried about him, being in only his second game, of course. Bryce Young had a whole season last year. Caleb Williams from game 1 to 2 showed some signs of improvement. Still not a very good game by him at all, facing a really good Houston Texans defense. But he showed a bit more growth from game 1 to 2. His pocket presence was a little bit better. Or tried to, make some crazy college plays that don't work against NFL talent, players. He was a little bit more poised in the pocket, especially in the first half of the game. And so that's an improvement, right? You can see that he's getting a bit more comfortable from week to week. Bryce Young, that's just never really been the case. The guy has just never been really that accurate. He sometimes just makes poor decisions leading to interceptions. He has 3 already on the season in only 2 games. Not a great statistic. And when you think about the talent of the teams that Bryce Young went against, the Chargers and the Saints, I just look at it and go, yeah, I can understand why the Carolina Panthers benched him. And you go into Andy Dalton, and I just don't know if it's a win to start Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton's not going to get you the playoffs, more than likely. I would have ridden out Bryce Young for a few more games. I understand why they took him out. And I think, he isn't the right guy for Carolina, but I would have given him more of a chance, given the fact that Andy Dalton coming in, what does that do for you, right? Because if Bryce Young isn't your guy, you're looking for a quarterback in the draft, right? That's your next, goal. You're looking for a quarterback if Bryce Young is not the guy. But we'll see. Let me know what you guys think about Bryce Young being benched. I thought it was actually really crazy news. I didn't it wasn't a shock, that it was never going to happen. But I was surprised it happened in week 2. Really short leash on him, and kind of shows the way the Panthers kind of view Bryce Young. Maybe they're trying to get him to sit down for a little while, learn more, and then get him back in there. I just don't think that's ever going to work. That very rarely works. But I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.